You know what's wild? We live in a culture that applauds oversharing, and yet we are lonelier than ever. We are constantly narrating our lives to people who haven't earned the right to hear our stories. And listen, I'm not talking about hiding. I'm not talking about putting on a mask and pretending everything's okay. I'm talking about the sacredness of your truth. I'm talking about how your vulnerability is not a marketing strategy. It's a sacred space. A space meant for people who've shown up with consistency, with compassion, and with courage. See, every time we hand over our heart to someone who hasn't shown they can hold it, we lose a piece of trust in ourselves. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they ask the ask. You don't have to explain your healing. You don't have to translate your pain into sound bites for people who won't stay long enough to hear the silence. There is a massive difference between secrecy and privacy. Secrecy says, I'm hiding because I'm ashamed. Privacy says, and I'm protecting what's sacred. You deserve to be surrounded by people who listen without fixing, who witness without judgment, who stay even when your story gets messy. And if someone hasn't earned the right to hear your story, you don't have to feel guilty for keeping it to yourself. Guard your truth like it's gold. Because it is, one of the most misunderstood truths about vulnerability is this: your story is sacred. We throw that word around like it's decoration. Sacred. But what it really means is that your story, your lived experience, your heartache, your joy, your healing, it's holy ground. And not everyone deserves to walk on it. We live in a world where we are constantly encouraged to post, share, disclose, and narrate every moment of our lives. We confuse transparency with connection. We think that the more we share, the more we're seen. But what I've learned, what I've lived, is that being seen is not the same as being held. And your story deserves to be held. The people who have earned the right to hear your story are the ones who have shown up over and over in small, unglamorous ways. They're not the ones who ask out of curiosity or give you a polite head tilt and a quick, how are you really doing? They're the ones who sit with you in silence, who show up without needing a resolution, who stay even when it's uncomfortable. Those people exist, but they are rare. And we have to stop offering our sacred truths to those who haven't demonstrated they can handle them. Because when we do, we don't just risk rejection. We risk learning that maybe we weren't worth staying for, and that kind of wound can take years to heal. What happens when we hand over our truth to people who haven't earned it? And we inadvertently teach ourselves to distrust our own voice. Every time someone dismisses or minimizes or walks away from our vulnerability, we internalize a lie that we were a too much, that we were a dramatic, that we should just get over it. And even if we know better in our heads, our hearts absorb the message. So we get quieter, we get more guarded. Not because we don't want to connect, but because we've been trained to believe that our pain is a burden. But your pain is not a burden. Your story is not a burden. You are not obligated to share your truth with everyone just because they ask. You are not a live feed of emotional content. You are not a public diary. And I say this with as much love as I can possibly muster. If someone hasn't earned your trust, they do not deserve access to your vulnerability. Not now. Not ever. Sharing your life should be a choice born out of mutual trust and emotional safety, not guilt, not pressure, and definitely not performance. You don't owe the world constant commentary on your internal process. That's not honesty. That's emotional labor without boundaries. One of the most powerful things you can do is pause and ask yourself, who is this story for? Is it for connection or for approval? Is it to be witnessed or to be validated? Is it because you seen or because you're afraid of being invisible? That self-inquiry is everything, because once you recognize that your story is sacred, you'll stop giving it away to people who see it as casual conversation. You'll learn to discern between those who listen to respond and those who listen to understand. That discernment becomes your shield. It becomes your wisdom. So many of us have grown up believing that to be close to someone means they get access to everything. That intimacy is measured by disclosure. But true intimacy isn't built on access. It's built on honor. It's built when someone sees your pain and doesn't flinch, when they hold your truth and don't try to fix it or flee from it. That's when you know. That's when you share. Not before. Until then, your story belongs to you. Let it be yours until someone proves they can carry it with care. We have to stop confusing vulnerability with performance. Somewhere along the line, we started believing that being vulnerable meant telling the world everything, our fears, our trauma, our heartbreaks, as if vulnerability was measured in volume or visibility. But real vulnerability isn't about being loud. It's not about standing in front of a crowd and spilling your soul. It's about being real and open in spaces where safety exists. It's about being honest, not just with others, but with yourself. Vulnerability is not performative. It's not something we do to get applause or affirmation or followers. And when we start using our pain as currency for connection, we lose the very thing that makes vulnerability powerful. It's authenticity. So many people are exhausted because they keep trying to connect through overexposure. They keep sharing and sharing and sharing, hoping someone will finally see them. But connection doesn't come from how much we share. It comes from why we share and with whom. We start performing our pain. We move out of alignment with ourselves. We're no longer showing up for healing. We're showing up for approval. And that approval never lasts. It's fleeting, it's addictive, and it keeps us chasing something that was never meant to be found outside of ourselves. That kind of vulnerability becomes an act, and eventually, the act starts to hollow us out. There is nothing healthy about putting your most tender truths on display for people who haven't proven they know what to do with them. That's not strength. That's self-abandonment. Vulnerability is meant to be shared in sacred spaces, not shouted across platforms for reactions. When we treat our stories like they're meant for everyone, We lose the ability to discern who has actually earned seat at the table of. It's like giving your house key to a stranger because they smiled at you once. Doesn't mean they're equipped to handle it with care. Not everyone has the emotional skill set or the willingness to hold space for your healing, and that's okay. But it means you need to be more intentional with your vulnerability. What people often forget is that true vulnerability comes with boundaries. It has a framework. It knows its own worth. It says, I will be real with you. I will let you in, but not if it costs me my dignity. Without boundaries, vulnerability becomes a performance, and performances are exhausting. Performances aren't sustainable. You cannot live your life in a spotlight, constantly curating your pain into digestible pieces for others. At some point, you have to step off the stage and ask yourself, who am I when no one's watching? That's where real healing happens, not in the performance. There's also a trap we fall into when we believe that being vulnerable means being constantly available, that we have to answer every question, share every detail, open every door. But vulnerability without boundaries isn't bravery, it's exposure. And exposure without trust is trauma. That's the part we forget. Vulnerability is a two-way exchange. If someone hasn't shown you that they can sit with your truth without trying to fix it, judge it, or use it against you, then you are not obligated to offer it to them. That's not rudeness. That's wisdom. That's self-respect. When you perform your pain for validation, you start betraying yourself. You begin to shape your story not by what's true, but by what will be accepted. You edit out the messy parts. You highlight what people want to hear. Anything less than that isn't authenticity. Survival. Saying the true thing in the right moment to the right person. Anything less than that isn't authenticity. It's survival. And you weren't born to survive your story. You were born to live it, honor it, and protect it. Privacy is power, not shame. But for so many of us, that's a hard truth to accept. We've been conditioned to believe that if we're not constantly opening up, constantly disclosing, constantly letting people in, we must be hiding something. We associate silence with secrecy, and secrecy with guilt. But the truth is, there's a vast difference between keeping something private and keeping it secret. Secrecy is driven by fear, by shame, by the belief that if someone knew, they'd reject us. Privacy, on the other hand, is born from strength. It's the quiet knowing that not everything sacred needs to be shared to be real. We live in a culture that glorifies exposure. The more vulnerable you are publicly, the more brave you're considered. But here's what no one talks about. There's nothing brave about giving people access to parts of you they haven't earned. Privacy says, this part of me is still tender. This part of me is still growing. And it doesn't belong to everyone. That's not hiding. That's not hiding. Healing. needs safety. It needs stillness. And when you're constantly broadcasting your healing, you're not giving it the space it needs to truly root itself. You're rushing it. And something as precious as healing should never be rushed. There's a pressure that builds when you feel like you have to keep people updated on your emotional journey. Like if you're not constantly proving your growth, then maybe you're not growing at all. But that's not how healing works. Some of the most profound transformations happen in silence, in solitude, in the quiet corners of our lives where no one is watching. And those moments, they are no less powerful just because no one sees them. Privacy allows your healing to belong to you first. It gives you room to breathe, to stumble, to be unsure without the added weight of performance or external opinion. When you practice privacy, you're not shutting people out. You're choosing who gets to come in. You're being selective with your emotional energy. And that's not selfish. It's smart. Not everyone deserves front row seats to your process. Some people haven't done the work in their own lives to hold space for yours. As some people judge, and some people simply don't know how to be present with fix. You are allowed to reserve the most intimate parts of your journey for people who have demonstrated the capacity to carry them with care. And that doesn't make you guarded, it makes you grounded. There is a quiet confidence that comes with honoring your own boundaries. So when you begin to separate secrecy from privacy, you reclaim your voice. You stop explaining your choices. You stop apologizing for your process. You start trusting yourself more deeply because you're no longer looking outward for permission to be where you are. That's when your healing starts to deepen. Not because others validate it, but because you do. You recognize that your story doesn't lose value just because it's not on display. It's still true. It's still powerful. And it's still yours. Privacy also gives you space to integrate. When you're constantly sharing, you're processing out loud, often before you fully understood what something means for you. But when you hold it close for a while, when you sit with your experiences before speaking them, you allow wisdom to form. You let the story settle before you tell it. That's how insight grows, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the private spaces we protect for ourselves. Your truth doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be honored. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is say nothing at all, not out of fear, but out of reverence for what is still becoming. Protecting your energy is not just about self-care. It's about self-respect. We often think of energy as something we can stretch, bend, or sacrifice to accommodate others. But the truth is, your emotional energy is a finite resource. Both. And every time you share a vulnerable piece of yourself with someone who hasn't earned that privilege, you're making a withdrawal from your emotional bank account. Over time, those withdrawals add up. You begin to question your instincts, your decisions, even your worth. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's strategic. It's knowing that your well-being matters just as much as anyone else's curiosity. It's easy to fall into the trap of all the time. That being available emotionally and mentally makes us a good person, a good friend, a good partner. But boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges to healthier, more sustainable connections. When you protect your energy, you're not rejecting others, you're honoring yourself. You're recognizing that not every conversation deserves your emotional labor. Not every question requires an answer. And not every listener is equipped to hold your truth. It takes courage to say, I'm not available for that right now. But that kind of courage saves you from emotional burnout down the road. There's a difference between someone being available and someone being safe. Just because someone asks how you're doing or offers a listening ear doesn't mean they're capable, truly holding space for you. Some people ask because they're curious, not because they care. Some want your story as gossip, not as insight. You have to learn to discern the difference. Ask yourself, has this person shown they can be consistent, compassionate, and confidential? Confidential. If the answer is no, then you don't owe them anything. Your energy isn't public property. It's not a resource to be exploited or consumed on demand. You also have to get honest about what drains you. Pay attention to the conversations that leave you feeling empty. Notice who asks for emotional access but never reciprocates. We often dismiss these small signs, brushing them off as no big deal. But over time, they take a toll. Protecting your energy means being fiercely honest about what is worth your time. It means allowing yourself to say no without guilt. It means choosing peace over people-pleasing. And it means recognizing that just because you can carry someone else's emotions doesn't mean you should. One of the hardest lessons in protecting your energy is learning that not everyone who reaches out deserves a response. We live in a culture that idolizes availability. We applaud people who answer every message, who show up to every event, who never say no. But emotional availability without boundaries is a setup for exhaustion. You're allowed to choose silence. You're allowed to turn off your phone. You're no longer handing out backstage passes to the most sacred parts of your soul just because someone smiled at the door. When you start to build trust through observation, not assumption, everything changes. You begin to move through the world more grounded, more confident, more clear. You stop mistaking attention for care. You stop confusing interest with investment. And you start surrounding yourself with people who don't just say they're safe, but who act like it. Over and over again. Trust becomes less about who makes you feel good in the moment and more about who makes you feel safe in the long run. And that kind of trust, that's where real connection begins. Not everyone is meant to know the whole story. The hard way. We share something tender, raw, or deeply personal, thinking we're being transparent or building a connection, only to be met with misunderstanding, judgment, or worse, betrayal. And when that happens, we start to shrink. We question ourselves. We wonder if it was wrong to share at all. But the problem isn't that you opened up. The problem is that you offered something sacred to someone who didn't have the capacity to honor it. Just because someone is in your life doesn't mean they've earned access to your most intimate truths. Discernment is not about being guarded. It's about being wise. It's the deep inner knowing that helps you recognize who's emotionally safe, who's emotionally curious, and who's emotionally reckless. Some people want to know your story, not so they can support your healing, but because they're fascinated by your pain. They consume your vulnerability like entertainment. They ask questions not to hold space, but to satisfy their own discomfort. And when we hand over our truths to those kinds of people, we don't just feel exposed. We feel betrayed by our own judgment. That's why discernment is everything. It teaches us that trust is not a gift. It's an invitation to be earned. There's power in holding back. There's strength in keeping certain parts of your life between you and the people who have proven they can handle it with care. You don't owe the full narrative to everyone who asks, or even who loves you. Love without emotional maturity can still wound. People can care about you and still not know how to handle your truth. And when you keep sharing with people who don't have the emotional toolkit to walk with you, you start thinking you're problem. You're just sharing too deeply with people who haven't shown they can go there with you. One of the most healing things you can do is reclaim ownership over your story. That means you decide which chapters are public. It means understanding that vulnerability is not a wide open door. It's a carefully chosen path. You can be authentic without being exposed. You can be real without being raw in front of the wrong audience. There's a difference between honesty and overexposure. And that difference is discernment. When you practice it, you stop trying to prove your worth through transparency. You start honoring your truth by protecting its sacredness. We often think, if they knew everything, they'd understand me. But not everyone is capable of understanding. Not everyone wants to understand. Some people don't listen to get closer. They listen to control, to critique, or to feel better about themselves. And when we try to force connection by oversharing, we don't get closer. We feel more alone. True connection isn't built by sharing more. It's built by sharing why. It's built by sharing wisely. With people who've demonstrated not only interest, but integrity. With people who know how to hold space without needing to be the center of it. So, the next time you feel the urge to share your whole story, pause. Ask yourself, has this person earned the right to hear it? Have they shown they know how to hold what's heavy? Will they honor this part of me or use it as leverage later? You don't owe anyone access to your unhealed places just to be seen as open. Your story isn't less valuable when it's protected. In fact, sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is keep it close, honor its weight, and wait for someone who meets you with both curiosity and care. So, it means understanding that real strength isn't loud. It's grounded. It's the quiet decision to protect your peace, to choose intentionality over impulse, and to hold your truth with reverence instead of handing it out for approval. You don't owe anyone your inner world just because they ask. Your vulnerability is a gift, not a guarantee. So stop telling everyone what's going on in your life, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. Because when you stop oversharing, you start reclaiming your energy, reclaiming your boundaries, reclaiming your power. And that's when your healing becomes your own again, unapologetic, sacred, and fully yours.